The devil's been busy in your backyard.
Yes, the big devil has been very busy in our huge backyard in the United States of America. Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Bob Hieronimus, and our executive producer and research assistant is Laura Kortner, and our engineer is Anita Brockington. Well, our topic, both hours tonight, is UFOs at the drive-in. Yes, indeed, by our dear friend Preston Dennett. Preston Dennett. Well, let me give you a couple examples here. California, 1972. The audience at the Paramount Drive-In flees in panic as a metallic saucer swoons down and hovers right next to the movie screen. Woo, boy. Then, what about that in Ohio? Good old round on the ends and high in the middle, 1974. A UFO targets the Ascot Park Drive-In, blacking out the movie and causing the entire audience to become hypnotically entranced. My gosh, elevating their consciousness right there. Then, July 7th, 1977, in China. Well, in Baltimore, we always used to pronounce it China. We know it's China, but we all said China. Well, July 7, 1977, 300 people were injured and 2 are killed by a low-flying UFO as it targets an open-air showing of a movie to a crowd of 3,000 people. Now, this area of UFO research has been ignored for too long. Something profound is happening here. And this book reveals a bizarre type of UFO behavior that only a lucky few have ever seen. So come along this fascinating journey tonight that is sure to change the way you feel about UFOs or flying saucers, however you want to call them. And our guest, of course, is Preston Dennett, who first began investigating UFOs in 1986. After learning that his family and friends and co-workers were having encounters. And since then, he's interviewed hundreds of people and investigated a wide variety of cases. And he has written dozens of books and more than 100 articles about UFOs and the paranormal. He is a frequent guest on radio, TV, and speaks across the United States. He has a loud voice. He currently resides in good old Southern California, which we absolutely loved when we went there. Welcome back to 21st Century Radio, Preston.
Hey, thanks, Bob. Thanks for having me back.
Are you sitting up straight?
I sure am.
That's good. You're not chewing gum, right?
No, stop chewing gum.
It's a good thing. Well, one of the reasons why we have had you on so many times is because you have a very unique perspective on UFOs that most other UFO researchers do not have, and I very much appreciate that. How did you get involved in UFO research? Tell us, please.
Involuntarily, for sure. Was not looking for it. Very skeptical of UFOs. Heard a report on the news. I remember it vividly. This was November 1986. And I was not ready to hear people's UFO stories. But here was this pilot, a Japanese commercial airliner flying over Alaska, was followed by a UFO for over an hour. And this is all they said on the news. It was very tongue-in-cheek. They laughed nervously and moved on.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember they showed the pilot, and I'm like, wow, this is a pilot of a commercial airliner. He must have lost it. He must be on drugs. He must have hallucinated. He's seeing a reflection off the ice cap. I'm going through all these theories because I know UFOs aren't real.
Yeah, of course they're not. No.
Not that I've done any research at all. But I was pretty much convinced that I was right. Turned out I wasn't. I don't know how it happened, but I asked my brother about what this pilot saw because he had seen a UFO. And I was a little bit curious, and he described this incredible encounter. I mean, he actually chased this object down the road. It's very low, maybe 50, 100 feet up, metallic saucer, a little dome on top, and he chased it in his car with his 2 friends.
Well,
And there were other people chasing this thing down the road.
how,
Actually, down the street, we're very close to where I live right now.
well, how did they feel? How did his friends feel about that? I mean, did he ask them, "Hey, you want to come along and watch this UFO," or did he just drag them along?
Yeah, this thing just appeared, and they all three took off enthusiastically after it. I'm like, Marco, you got to be kidding me. He's like, you don't believe me? Talk to Greg, talk to Phil. Those were his friends. And you know what I did? I called them up. And because I knew them, they were, over at the house now and then. And they described the same thing. I'm like, I'm scratching my head at this point. I'm like, there's just no way. I know they're not lying. I don't think they're misperceiving. But they must have seen swamp gas, even though it obviously wasn't. So I started thinking about it more, and I asked, other people in my family. My other brothers and sisters hadn't seen anything, but my sister-in-law is like, gives me this look, and I'm like, what? She says, well, yeah, I saw one. And I'm like, really? Well, what did you see? And it was this UFO, a bright, actually 3 lights in a kind of triangular formation over Van Nuys, a pretty crowded area. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. She says, no, it was there for a while. You don't believe me? Talk to Adelaide. He was there and another guy. I'm like, all right, what's Adelaide's number? I need to talk to him. And he said, oh, yeah, there was 3 objects. My sister-in-law, she thought it was one object with 3 lights on it. But he's like, no, I think they were 3 separate objects because one of them darted away in the end. And I'm like, wow, okay. And had a friend. I started asking friends. There was a family friend by the name of Sylvia, who we'd known for years and years. And she lived not too far from where I lived at the time in Topanga Canyon. And she's like, oh, yeah, I saw one. It came right over our house. I'm like, what did you see? She said it was a big egg-shaped object, maybe 500,000 feet up. And they ran outside because they heard it. It was this really weird, low buzzing noise. And she and her friend both saw it. I'm like, wow, all these people have witnesses with them. I'm like, you sure it wasn't a plane? She's like, Preston, it was a giant egg-shaped object. I'm like, okay. So I brought it up at work. And the lady another big mistake. I'd worked with Diane. That's not her real name, but I'll use a pseudonym because of what actually happened to them. It's like, oh, yeah, me and my whole family saw one over church camp in, Camp Julian in the San Bernardino Mountains. I'm like, really? She's like, it was this star-like object. It was darting at right angles. It was there for an hour. We've watched this thing, all of us. I'm like, wow, let me talk to your daughter. She was there. Her husband wouldn't talk to me. So I talked to her daughter, and her daughter described an encounter with gray ETs.
Gray.
And I'm like, oh, yeah. So, and I'm talking to Diane about this, and in walks Dorothy, who I love and worked with for years. She's not going to lie to me. She's like, UFOs? Oh, one followed us home from the library. I'm like, Dorothy, you got it. And she's Preston, this thing was a star-like object in the sky.
Yeah, sounds like you were far behind the rest of your friends out there.
Yeah, I was scandalized. I was not happy with them because I felt like they were keeping secrets from me. And I asked them about that, and they're like, well, you wouldn't have believed me, would you? And I'm like, well, probably not. Probably, they're right.
Well, when I always hear the term swamp gas, I think of the one experience, every now and then I remember the time that I was invited to the White House by the president. This is President Jerry Ford. I wasn't allowed to see and spend time with him at the time because I had long hair and a beard, but they were honoring me because of my research. And I wanted to ask the president, because he was the guy that brought this up concerning swamp gas.
Yep.
Because I of all things, I could not believe it was swamp gas. But anyway, so unfortunately, I was never allowed to get that across. One of the major frustrations in my life. That's what happens when you have long hair and sometimes a beard. I guess things have changed a little bit, but back in those days, you were pointed out and not to be trusted.
Yep. Well, things have changed.
Yes.
Now everyone's got purple long hair.
Yes, and green hair and everything else now. But what inspired you to write about UFOs at drive-in theaters? I don't think I've ever seen any other book that ever deals with drive-in theaters. How come you picked this out?
Yeah, well, there isn't one. This is the first. In fact, I couldn't find a lot of accounts in books, honestly, and did not think this was a thing at all, but was pretty early on in my research. I'm going to say early 1990s, when a new girl came into the office where I worked, and her name was Claudia. She found out I was a UFO researcher, and her face lit up.
Yay!
I'm like, what? Okay,
Finally.
Claudia. Lay it on me. And she did. She did not hold back. She says, Preston, I was at the Paramount Drive-In Theater in Paramount, California. This is the one you mentioned, 1972. And she notices her parents aren't watching the movie. She's in the backseat of a little VW Beetle. And her parents are just looking to the right of the movie screen, entranced. And she looks out the window and she sees people are running away, screaming. They're screaming out loud, dropping their popcorn, their drinks, running to their cars. Cars are screeching out. And she sticks her head out and gets the real shock. There is a giant flying saucer. I'm going to call it a flying saucer because that's what it was, right next to the screen. So I'm talking like, 50 feet up? Drive-in movie screens are about 100 feet high generally. And this thing was below the top of the screen. And about as, not quite as wide, but pretty big. She said it was silver, metallic, reminded her of a silver spoon. And she could actually hear it. It was making sort of a whooshing noise. But mostly she heard people screaming. And yeah, her parents were entranced. Everyone was just in a complete panic. What's really weird is they don't quite remember what happened. They think, they don't quite remember it leaving, or they never talked about it either. Mm-hmm. They never talked about it for years. And in fact, one day, Claudia was in the kitchen with her mother, and the radio's on, and it's a call-in show, and someone's calling in to report a UFO sighting. He's like, I was at the Paramount Drive-In around 1972, and this object comes right next to the screen, and they turn to each other, Claudia and her mother, and go, oh, that was us. We were there, weren't we? And her mother's like, yeah, I remember that now. Claudia says, Mom, what happened? Why did we never talk about this? Why didn't we talk about it? And neither of them could explain it.
And as you point out later in your book and throughout that, a lot of people just are somehow forget the experience.
Yeah, I don't think it's us necessarily forgetting because it's traumatic or something.
Yeah.
I mean, that makes no sense. I think this is induced.
Of course.
I really do.
Of course. These beings are pretty advanced beings from that perspective. They put us to shame in that particular area. But right now, we're not going to be put to shame because we need to take a break on 21st Century Radio with our guest, Preston Dennett, UFOs at the Drive-In, 100 true cases of close encounters at drive-in theaters. Blue Giant Books, PrestonDennett.weebly, that's WEEBLY.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and listen to previous 21st Century Radio programs for free. And like our Facebook page for guest links and updates. You know what I was surprised to learn when studying the Statue of Liberty? That liberty for real women is the key to humanity's survival on this planet. Truly. And also that Lady Liberty has Native American roots, and that America has reverence for the female half of divinity or the goddess at its very foundation. Powerful women and role models for balance are all part of our new book, The Secret Life of Lady Liberty, Goddess in the New World. It's a new way to understand America's history and future. Buy your copy today at Amazon.com or Barnes & Noble, or from our website, SecretLifeOfLadyLiberty.com. That's SecretLifeOfLadyLiberty.com. Just chock full of all new reasons to love the United States of America.
I'm Dr. Roger Lear, author of The Aliens and the Scalpel. We welcome you all to Dr. Bob Hieronimus at 21st Century Radio.
Oh, it's good to hear from him again. Whoa, long time. Welcome back to 21st Century Radio with our guest Preston Dennett. We're talking about UFOs at the drive-in, 102 cases of close encounters at drive-in theaters. What is a typical drive-in theater encounter?
I can tell you they're not normal sightings. These are, there are some random flybys, because let's face it, you're out there at night for, 2, 3 hours, 4? Your chances of seeing a UFO are much greater. And we see a number of cases, I'm going to say about 20% of the 100 that I found, where people just look up and see something fly by. But that's not what's going on here. These encounters are profoundly different in a number of ways. And the first one being these are very low level. So usually, 100 feet or lower, right next to the theater, in full view. That's the first major difference. The second would be that they're long-lasting. In a lot of them, not all, but often, it's more than just a few seconds. It's 5 minutes, it's 10, it's 15, it's an hour, it's 2 hours. That's unusual.
Yeah, very unusual.
Thirdly, they don't just sit there. They will actually perform. They put on a brazen display, a show. They're there to entertain. And you'll see what I mean when we get to some of these cases. But these are not normal at all. This is a really unusual type of UFO behavior. And here's the final, and I think most important difference. And there's nothing like this out in the UFO literature that I could find, really. These objects are being viewed by about 200 people at a time. Maybe 100 in some cases, 300, 400, 600. So these are very widely viewed. And that removes pretty much all chance of hoax, hallucinations, misperception. And I'm looking through the literature, thinking, okay, this has got to have happened in maybe baseball games, right?
Sure.
Or, sports events, concerts. And I found some, I did, but only a tiny amount, a small handful. And as I began to dig into cases like this, because, after hearing about Claudia's case, that's kind of what got me interested. But really, it was when I was writing UFOs over Colorado, and I ran into 3 cases in a row. And I thought, uh-oh, this is a thing. They are coming. They are targeting theaters. So, yeah, these are very widely viewed, and there's nothing like that except for maybe, and we talked about this, I think, last year, Schoolyard UFO sightings.
Oh, yeah. Geez whiz. That was a great book.
Hey, thank you. Yeah.
We passed that book on to 20 people at least. And because it was so popular, it was something. Well, I'm not going to get into that any further. but it was really exciting for them to see that these things are happening all the time.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing with these drive-in theater encounters. They actually coincide precisely with the Schoolyard encounters. They began around 1950 and continued on a very regular, almost timed, a weirdly sort of timed basis, like 1 or 2 per year. Or there'll be a couple on the same night, or every couple of weeks. Particularly in the 50s, it was very active. But I have to say, it didn't that was the pre-show. Honestly, in the 60s and 70s is when these cases really ramped up and they started putting on, what I would call displays.
Much different than the earlier ones? What kind of displays?
The earlier ones were briefer, but they'd have the same earmarks that I look for. I mean, the earliest case I think I found was over the Starlight Theater. This is in Spartanburg, North Carolina, 1950. Vernon Gwynn, he's a journalist, was there with his wife, and this dirigible kind of object came down over the theater and moved off. And then it came back and moved off, and then it came back a third time. So they're starting to freak out. And when it came back a fourth time, it was quite low, They could see that it was definitely, because it looked almost like a cloud-like object in the beginning, but no, they could see this was a solid object, silvery or white, very large, very low. So he calls the Air Force, and it's routed to Blue Book, which is just in its formation at this time.
Mm-hmm.
And they show very strong interest in this sighting. And his report, get this surprises me, is forwarded to Colonel John Meads, the commanding general at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
Whoa.
Right? That's UFO Central.
Yes, it is. It's big timer.
So that indicates to me that not only did our government know about this from the beginning, despite their denials, they also showed extreme interest in it.
Indeed. Even though there are now videos that show on Mars activity on Mars, and especially the face on Mars, you still do not have, we were talking about this maybe last week or so, you still do not have NASA noting that indeed there are beings on Mars. And as we're now beginning to find out, some of them are we the people, which is quite extraordinary. Yes, we the people on Mars. Why are UFOs hovering over drive-in theaters? Don't they have anything else to do but to hang around drive-in? Are they there to watch the movies? Are they?
That's one of my theories. I actually looked at all the movies, that people could remember. Often they don't remember the movie; they remember the sighting. But yeah, there was one who saw The Exorcist, who came down, The Simpsons, King Kong, Jurassic Park. Sort of your standard James Bond, all these different movies. I'm not sure they're coming for the movies. And the reason I don't think so is because they don't usually stay for the entire movie.
Oh.
So maybe they didn't like it, but no. They move behind the screen sometimes. I'm not sure they're coming for the movie. I have to tell you, though, when you look at like a picture, an aerial photo of a drive-in movie from above, it's a very striking image, a very big footprint on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And let's face it, these screens are 100 feet across. They're huge and have got to be pretty visible from way up there in the outer space. And I know UFOs are all about screens. We always hear that when someone's taken on board, they describe computer screens or screens with images.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, there's that big beam of light we're shining onto the screen. That's got interest in them.
That's for sure.
So
yeah.
I'm thinking, well, maybe they're curious. Could that be? But ultimately, what I found is I started to see this pattern of displays. I'm thinking, no, what's going on in here is they're showing themselves off on purpose. They are putting on a show. They're like, you want a show? We'll give you a show. And
well, we've been asking for it for a long time, so.
Yeah, I think the real question is, why would they do that? Why would they behave in that way? And I think it's because they're sending a message. They are saying, we are here. We are real. Look at us. You don't believe? Watch this.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps, and I'm just speculating here, that what's the end game in all of this? I mean, why would they want to announce their presence? I'm thinking they're pushing towards open official contact. That's what they want.
I believe you're right.
Bit by bit, I think they're doing their 2 cents because it can come down and not completely cause an uproar and change society all at once. Just slowly acclimatize us to their presence.
Well, that's what our government says. That's their excuse now as to why they didn't tell us. Even though they destroyed so many people's reputations and lives, some people committed suicide because they felt that their government obviously doesn't tell the truth. Yeah. And if it weren't for the New York Times a couple of years ago, we still would be saying that they would still be saying the same things, which is they don't exist. But New York Times is pretty powerful. And that particular story really broke the whole thing wide open, and I'm glad to hear that. I'm sure that you were happy about that, weren't you?
Yeah, I was hoping for a little more of an explosive reaction from the public, but I
Yeah,
guess the UFOs did it.
I know.
Right?
This it's like the public turned around and fell asleep again because they don't because they realize there's something going on that they cannot control. I think there's a lot of considerable fear when it gets into those kind of things.
Yeah.
Now, what kind of objects are people seeing in the skies, in the heavens? Are they just always round saucers or whatever?
Yeah, they're almost always your typical, not always, but just about. Uh, there's a lot of saucers in these accounts. An awful lot of your classic flying saucer with little lights around the perimeter, sometimes portholes, metallic, quiet. They're not always that, but usually. Some people do describe, say, a triangular boomerang shaped or a glowing sort of orb type of thing, but usually they're flying saucers in your typical way. Or, there's cigar shaped. Here's a good case.
Oh, that's my favorite one. The
This is
cigar ones.
really
Yeah.
interesting case.
Tell us
Another
about it.
another early one. This is 1952, August 12th, the Terrace Drive-In in Bakersfield, California. Not far, from where I live now. It'd take me a couple of hours to get there, most. It's a pretty big theater. 650 cars can fit there. And Lieutenant Jenkins was there with his girlfriend, I believe. And this object, without any warning, they did not really see it coming, just drops down and parks itself over the screen. It's 15 feet up. It's right over the screen.
15 feet. Oh.
And it stops just briefly. It's got little lights on it, maybe lit up its lights at that point. That's what some people said. And takes off like a bullet. So they all go running to the snack stand. It's what happened afterwards. It's really interesting. He calls the sheriff, Leroy Hatfield, and Leroy Hatfield, takes his account and hangs up, and the phone rings again. It's another person from the drive-in, and after the fourth call, he's like, "All right, just hold on, I'm coming down there." He drives down there. It's not far, and this is Kern County, and there's 100 people there. Still, the movie's over, and he starts taking interviews. Everyone wanted to talk to him. He took about 20 interviews. He's like, "That's it. My arm's too tired. I know what you guys saw." He fills out a report and sends it off to the Air Force. And nearest Air Force around there was Edwards Air Force Base, which is deeply implicated in UFOs at this time. This is August 1952. I think that's, now that I think of it, right near the whole Eisenhower incident.
Oh, yes.
Right? But at any rate, that's another story. He makes a report, and they're very interested. And a Blue Book officer writes up a report, marks it action at the top. And this just blew me away when I found out this. This report was sent, it actually went higher than Blue Book. It went to the Air Technical Intelligence Command at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which handled the really sensitive UFO reports. Also to Ent Air Force Base in Colorado, where we track incoming and outgoing air traffic, and to the very top of government, Director of Intelligence at Washington, D.C.
Well, I'm going to return to your cigar-shaped ones because that is my very favorite UFO. As a matter of fact, I've done a lot of murals. One of the murals I did at Johns Hopkins University back in 1968-69 showed 3 cigar shapes, UFOs, in which they are tilted, standing on end, and out of one of the, I can't tell if it's the front or the back, are all these other flying saucers coming out of the cigars. You talk about that in your book, don't you?
I do. That's one of the.
So you're going to be held responsible for this, for mentioning it. But I mean, the cigar shapes. Some of them, some of the people that I worked with a long time ago, talked about their cigar. Some of these cigar shapes being over a mile long. Some many miles long. Holy cow! Especially in Saturn's rings. That's where they saw some of these very large beings. we got to take a break now? Yes, we'll take a break now. When we come back, I'm going to ask you something very hard. What is your favorite case? So you've got to give some serious thinking about this, because I'm sure you know you have a lot of favorite cases. Okay? We'll be coming back with our guest, Preston Dennett, UFOs at the Drive-In. 100 True Cases of Close Encounters at Drive-In Theaters. Boy, what a book. What a book. Brand new stuff. Brand new. Preston Dennett, Weebly.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and listen to previous 21st Century Radios for free.
You can learn the amazing answer only when you see the most thrilling picture in years. It came from outer space. In the astonishing realism of 3 dimensions, with objects coming right out of the screen, so real they almost touch you.
Oh my Lord, look out. Okay, welcome back to 21st Century Radio. We're in outer space right now with Preston Dennett. Yes, we are. And of course, we're talking about his book, UFOs at the Drive-In, 100 True Cases of Close Encounters at Drive-In Theaters, Blue Giant Books. And by the way, Preston Dennett, see the link on Facebook page for 21stcenturyradio.com, and you'll be able to contact him that way. Now, we're going to find out right now what his favorite case was. Rules and regulations 506 of the Penal Code demand such a thing.
It's not fair, but all right. I have several, like you said.
Yeah. Okay.
But I'll pick this one. I got to talk to the witness firsthand, Pat Mitchell. Really nice man. He was super excited to talk to me, and not as excited as I was to talk to him, I'll tell you. This is an amazing case. Somewhere in the mid-1960s, he couldn't pin down the exact date, but he was 17, 18, 19 years old. Went to the theater with his friend. This is the South Hutch Drive-In Theater in South Hutchinson, Kansas. Actually a pretty big screen, 52 feet wide, 120 feet high. And they were watching the latest James Bond movie. He doesn't remember which one, but he got there early. They got their popcorn, hooked up the little speaker there. You remember those little speakers we had to put on? For those who don't know what a drive-in movie theater is. There were these little detachable speakers. So they're watching the movie. It's pretty exciting. It's action-packed. It's gripping. When suddenly his friend says, "Do you see that?" Because coming over the theater in perfect eye line of the screen is a glowing object. And it looks like it's pretty much off there in the distance, but still right above the screen, very low, and approaching the theater directly. And Pat's like, "Yeah, I see it." And this thing, came fairly quickly. It wasn't zipping. It was moving along at a brisk pace, and it comes right up to the theater, and to their shock, it parks in the sky right next to the movie screen, pretty much exactly like it did at the Paramount Theater that I described earlier. It's below the level of the screen. He knows the screen is 120 feet high, and this thing is lower than that. And the screen is 50 feet wide. He's estimating this thing was about 40 feet wide. Perfect flying saucer, metallic, no portholes that he could see, but definitely colored lights, yellow, blue, green, red. It was really beautiful. And this thing just sits there for at least 5 minutes. People are getting out of their car. They're just staring at it, dumbfounded, awestruck. There's no panic. No one's flashing their lights or honking their horns, which does happen in a lot of these cases. And this thing just sits there, and then after about 5 minutes, it moves behind the screen itself. It's completely obscured by the movie screen. It must have been, he said, 10 feet away from it at this point, and comes out the other side, scoots up a little bit, and parks there, stock still in the sky. It's incredible for another 5 minutes. And people are just staring at it, going, "Oh my God, what is it? What is it?" People are beginning to figure out this is a UFO, but it's still a pretty new subject at this point. This was 1966, and this object proceeds to now take a long, lazy circle around the entire parking lot of the theater. as if to, round everybody up or make sure every single person saw it, which they did. I mean, at this point, everyone's staring at this thing. No one's watching the movie. And after circling the theater one rotation, it starts heading straight down the road, the highway next to the theater. I'm not off, off into the wilderness or anything. Straight down the road, right above it, and 20 miles an hour. So what happens? Everyone just screeches out of the theater to follow this thing. And they were among the first. They were in the center of the theater, so they got caught in the traffic jam there. About 20 cars, they're guessing, ahead of them, and probably 20 behind them. A convoy of at least 40 cars heads down the highway and follows this thing for 6 miles.
Whoa.
6 miles, which is a pretty long way.
Is this the reason why it's one of your favorite cases? I mean, because of all this time that it's being viewed and in different places?
Yeah, it's so dramatic and so kind of typical, and there's no panic. I like that. These people were very interested. And it parks again and it stays there for another 5 minutes, and everyone's like, wow, it's a UFO. And finally, after this thing has done its job, put on its show, it takes off straight up. A little dot in the sky, and it's gone.
It wraps it up.
Almost.
Yeah.
Actually, they, some people went to the newspaper and told the story. He knew that they did because he knew them. And when no story appeared, he's like, that's weird. He goes to the newspaper himself because he'd done some photography work for them. And he's like, what about this UFO that hovered over the South Hutch? And they're like, what? What UFO? They played dumb. They showed no interest. And that's when rumors started flying around town that the government had actually shown up, government officials of some kind, military, and quashed the story. So couldn't verify that, but it's not the only case where this sort of thing has happened.
That's for sure. That's for sure. Now, that was your most favorite case. And what would be the most dramatic? Because this one you just explained is very dramatic. What about this one? What was more dramatic than the one that you just had?
Oh, they're there. Several of them. I think what really, the first one that kind of clinched it for me, like, okay, they are putting on displays. This is not normal, was a case from George Fawcett, a pretty well-known UFO researcher.
Oh, yes. Good man.
This was May 1963. This was at the Wellington Circle Twin in Medford, Massachusetts. And a bunch of people were just at the theater when 2 discs show up, 2 glowing.
2?
And they park right next to the theater, not in front of the screen like they normally do, but next to the theater this time. And then 2 more come below them. And the first 2 move up a little bit to make room for the second group. And then 2 more come. So now there's
4?
6.
6. Whoa.
And we're not done yet. There is still more. 2 more come. So now we have a fleet of 8 discs in 2 columns of 4 each. And this is when the show begins. This is when they started doing this weird dance, like musical chairs rotating and going in different directions and up and down and putting on an obvious show. Forget this. 45 minutes they did this.
45 minutes.
Yep. Everyone was completely just awestruck, standing there watching this show. And an amazing case. This is how dramatic they can get. And there are even more dramatic cases, like what happened in Mentor, Ohio. Oh my God.
What happened in Mentor, Ohio? Are you going to tell us that?
Yes, this is mid-1960s.
Yeah.
By the way, just about 4 miles from a very dramatic schoolyard encounter. The witness called me up, or sent me an email. It's like, oh my God, she read the book. She's like, this is only a few miles from where I had my schoolyard sighting. I'm like, wow. So what happened in this case is this object shows up over the theater, and it's a huge cigar-shaped object. It's pretty low. It's hard to tell how low because this thing is massive. It's pretty darn big. And people who were watching the movie finally went to the projectionist and said, turn off the movie so it won't see us. And he did, because no one was watching the movie anyway. And this hovered there for about a half an hour. and then they put on the show. They're like, all right, you turned off your movie, we'll put on a show for you. And they did. This cigar-shaped object, which was horizontal, turns vertical and proceeds to release 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 discs. And these discs start dancing around the sky for quite some time. I think it was like 15 minutes. I'd have to look that up. It could have been longer than that. But we're moving in all kinds of unconventional movements and just putting on this really awesome show. And after they do that, they line up in a perfect column and one by one return like little school children into the cigar-shaped object.
Go back home inside, yeah.
Yep. And this cigar-shaped object resumes its horizontal position and moves off. You can't tell me that's not a show.
Yeah, that's a hell of a good show, too, and it's for free, which is a hard thing to do these days. Can't get anything basically for free. Now, there are a lot of theaters that were visited by UFOs. Has any theater been visited more than once? Is there any of them that are more popular with UFOs than others?
Absolutely, for sure.
Oh.
I mean, there was one in Canada that was visited so many times that the theater owners started advertising, "Come to the drive-in, see the UFOs."
That's right.
That, yeah. I don't have details on those cases, but I do know that the Yuma drive-in in Arizona has had multiple visitations. There was one in April of 1952, and I don't have a lot of details on that other than this object was seen right over the theater by all people at the theater. But it was only a couple of weeks later that it happened again. April 1952, this metallic structured object comes very low level right towards the theater and in full view. It's metallic. It's got lights on it. They can see it's got a metallic surface because there's little kind of scars or markings on it. It's rotating slowly. Sally Ann Diggs, she's the main witness. Her boyfriend, Lieutenant Gerald Williams, saw it as well. And they're just white as ghosts. They cannot believe this. We're not sure if everyone saw it because they called out the car next to them. He didn't see it, which was astonishing because it was in full view. But so they go home. It turns out her father is the commander, about to assume command of Yuma Air Force Base, not far away. And so he calls up Yuma Air Force Base and says, "Send over a public information officer. We need an investigation. My daughter saw something." And so they did. And it turned out not to be a great idea, really, because this public information officer, this captain, I believe it was, questions, the two witnesses and proceeds to try to debunk the sighting. Kind of made it clear to them that he thought it was a hallucination. Started making implications and wasn't really interested in recording their data.
What authority did the military have over this one? But who was that? That asked to be done.
The commander of Yuma Air Force Base.
My Lord, that is something to deny. When good thing his daughter suggested that they do this, or I don't know if we would ever heard of it again.
Yeah, when she gave a report to UFO researchers, she's like, "Yeah, the officer tried to debunk it as much as he could with my dad staring him down." And researchers also contacted him later, Richard Hall, a great researcher, and got a report from him. He verified the whole incident. It's very well verified. A number of these cases did reach Blue Book, but not one was recorded as, quote, unidentified.
Mm-hmm.
So they were not, Blue Book wasn't really investigating. It was not its purpose, ultimately. We know this. Hynek found out the hard way. J. Allen Hynek. He says, no, their whole purpose was to focus on cases with prosaic, conventional explanations, and anything that was obviously a UFO, they would attack the witness.
Correct. That's what I found to be so. disturbing, the destruction of people, and there were many people who lost their reputations, and some did commit suicide because of realizing that their government was lying to them, and they had to keep their mouth shut.
Yeah, I've talked to people who've been put in mental hospitals. No joke. They lost their child and still have problems with the authorities because her parents, this lady who reported a UFO, even though she had a witness, was put in a mental hospital, drugged up and everything.
Whoa. I don't think we'll ever get any balance to that type of a situation. Oops, we're about ready to, we only have a couple of minutes here. Whoops, right about now. Well, we're wrapping it up right now. Preston, we'll be back with you to talk about more 100 true cases of close encounters at drive-in theaters. Be right back.